This man thought he owned first class, until he insulted the wrong passenger. He laughed. He judged. He humiliated a quiet stranger in front of everyone. But seconds later, the captain revealed the truth, and the entire plane went silent. Because the man he mocked wasn't just a passenger, he was Keanu Reeves. What happened next left the rude man completely speechless, and taught everyone on board a lesson they'll never forget. "Excuse me, are you lost?" Those 5 sharp words cut through the calm hum of the airplane cabin like a blade. Conversation stopped. Pages stopped turning. Even the soft clink of glasses seemed to fade as every passenger in the first-class section slowly turned to see what was happening. The man who spoke stood out immediately. He was well-dressed in a tailored suit, his hair perfectly styled, his posture loud with confidence. A heavy gold watch rested proudly on his wrist as he leaned back into his wide leather seat, one hand wrapped around a glass of sparkling water. Everything about him screamed importance, at least in his own mind. Standing just beside him was another man, complete. He wore simple, neat clothes, no designer logos, no flashy accessories. He moved calmly, lifting a small travel bag and gently sliding it into the overhead compartment, as if he belonged exactly where he was. His expression was peaceful, his movements unhurried, almost graceful. The well-dressed man let out a short laugh, shaking his head in disbelief. "First class isn't for people like you," he said loudly, making sure half the cabin could hear. "You should check your ticket. Economy is back there. Or maybe you should wait for the next flight." A few passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One woman pressed her lips together, clearly disturbed. A young couple exchanged glances, unsure whether to look away or speak up. The atmosphere, once relaxed and luxurious, suddenly felt tight and awkward. The quiet man paused for just a moment. Then he turned, offered a small, polite smile, and continued settling into his seat without saying a word. No argument, no anger, no explanation. That only seemed to irritate the well-dressed man more. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice just enough to sound insulting. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "Anyone can pretend these days." A flight attendant nearby noticed the tension. She slowed her steps, clearly debating whether to intervene. Her eyes moved from the smug man to the quiet one, who was calmly fastening his seatbelt, completely unbothered. Around them, whispers began to spread. "Did you hear that? That was rude. Why would he say something like that?" The quiet man kept his gaze forward, looking out the window at the runway below. Sunlight reflected softly across his face. There was something about his calm presence that stood in sharp contrast to the arrogance filling the space beside him. The well-dressed man leaned back again, crossing his arms with satisfaction. In his mind, he had already won. He believed he had put someone in their place. He believed status came from money, clothing, and the seat you paid for. What he didn't realize was that the entire cabin had begun to see him very differently. Some passengers weren't uncomfortable because of the quiet man. They were uncomfortable because of him, and as the seconds passed, as the plane prepared for departure, one truth hovered silently in the air. This moment, this careless insult spoken so confidently, was about to become the single most embarrassing, because sometimes the people who say the least have the most power. And sometimes, judging a person by appearances doesn't just make you wrong. It exposes exactly who you are. The quiet man took his seat without complaint. He didn't sigh. He didn't look annoyed. He simply thanked the flight attendant with a gentle smile, fastened his seatbelt, and turned his attention toward the window. Outside, the airport lights shimmered as the plane prepared for departure. His calm behavior only made the situation worse. The rude man watched him closely, clearly irritated by the lack of reaction. He expected an argument, a defense, maybe even embarrassment. But the silence frustrated him. "People these days," the man muttered loudly, making sure others could hear, buying fake tickets, trying to look important. A few heads turned again. The tension in the cabin thickened. Across the aisle, a woman frowned deeply. She had been quietly reading, but now she closed her book and looked directly at the rude man. "That's not very kind," she said softly, her voice calm but firm. For a brief moment, the cabin went silent. Then the rude man laughed. "Kindness doesn't buy first-class tickets," he replied smugly. "Money does." Some passengers shifted in their seats. A man 2 rows back shook his head. Another looked down, uncomfortable. The atmosphere had changed completely. What should have been a peaceful, luxurious flight now felt heavy with unease. Meanwhile, the quiet man said nothing. No arguments. No explanations. No ego. He remained still, his hands resting calmly on the armrests, his gaze fixed outside the window. It was as if the rude man didn't exist. That silence spoke louder than any words. The flight attendant, who had been watching from a distance, finally stepped forward. Her expression was polite but cautious, trained professionalism masking her concern. "Sir," she asked gently, looking toward the rude man, "is everything all right here?" The rude man didn't hesitate. He raised his hand and pointed directly at the quiet man. "Check his ticket," he said confidently. "He doesn't belong here." A hush fell over the cabin. The flight attendant turned toward the quiet man, who calmly reached into his pocket and handed over his boarding pass without a single change in expression. She studied the ticket carefully, then she smiled. "Everything is perfectly in order, sir," she said, handing it back respectfully. "Tells. This seat is his." That should have ended it. That should have been the moment the rude man felt embarrassed, apologized, and let it go. But instead, he rolled his eyes. "Unbelievable," he muttered under his breath, crossing his arms and turning away. What he didn't realize was that something had already shifted around him. A young man a few seats away stared at the quiet man more closely. His eyes narrowed in recognition. A woman nearby whispered something to her husband. Another passenger slowly pulled out their phone, pretending to check messages, but clearly zooming in on the quiet man's face. Expressions changed, from confusion to curiosity to shock. The rude man noticed none of it. He was too busy feeling superior, too busy believing that money and status defined a person's worth. What he didn't know, what he couldn't imagine, was that several passengers had already recognized the quiet man, and they weren't shocked by his ticket. They were stunned by who he was. As whispers quietly spread through the first-class cabin, one thing became certain. The rude man was no longer the one being watched, and very soon the truth would surface. A truth that would turn his confidence into regret, his arrogance into silence, and this moment into a lesson no one on that flight would ever forget. A young man a few seats away casually pulled out his phone, pretending to check his messages. At first glance, it looked ordinary, just another passenger killing time before takeoff. But his fingers moved carefully as he tilted the screen slightly and zoomed in on the quiet man's face. His expression changed instantly. His eyes widened. His breath caught. "Wait," he whispered, leaning closer to his wife. "That's him." His wife frowned, confused. "Who?" The young man swallowed and whispered again, his voice barely audible. That's really him." Another passenger nearby noticed the reaction and leaned closer. "No way," he murmured. "Is that really?" The quiet man, completely unaware of the growing tension around him, adjusted his seat comfortably. A small child across the aisle stared at him curiously, then smiled and gave a shy little wave. The man smiled back. It wasn't forced. It wasn't for attention. Just a warm, genuine smile. The child's mother froze. Her eyes widened. She quickly covered her mouth with her hand, as if afraid to say the words out loud. "Oh my God," she whispered softly. "That's Keanu Reeves." The name didn't spread loudly. It didn't need to. It traveled quietly, seat to seat, whisper to whisper, like electricity moving through the cabin. He's sitting right there. No security. He's so normal. Phones slowly came out. Not raised high. Not obvious. Just careful glances, subtle photos, stunned smiles. Some passengers looked at each other in disbelief, as if confirming they were seeing the same thing. Others simply watched him. Not because he was famous, but because of how calm he was. Meanwhile, the rude man noticed something was wrong. He frowned as he saw people staring, not at him, but past him. He followed their gazes, confused. His confident posture stiffened. "What's going on?" he asked sharply. "Why is everyone looking over here?" No one answered him. A woman turned away. A man pretended to adjust his seat. Another passenger avoided eye contact entirely. For the first time since boarding, the rude man felt invisible. The quiet hum of the plane filled the silence. Then, suddenly, the captain's voice came over the speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard. We'll be departing shortly." People sat up straighter. Before takeoff, the captain continued, "We would like to acknowledge a very special guest traveling with us today." The cabin went completely silent. Even the rude man stopped breathing for a moment. "It's an honor to have Keanu Reeves flying with us," the captain said warmly. "Thank you for choosing our airline, sir." For a second, nothing. Then the cabin erupted into applause. Some people smiled. Some shook their heads in disbelief. A few quietly clapped, not wanting to disturb him too much. Keanu Reeves stood briefly, looking slightly embarrassed by the attention. He gave a small wave, a humble nod, and quickly sat back down, his cheeks faintly flushed. The applause slowly faded. But the silence that followed was louder than anything before. The rude man's face drained of color. The man he had mocked. The man he had judged. The man he claimed didn't belong. Was one of the most respected and admired people in the world. His confidence collapsed in seconds. And as Keanu calmly looked forward again, completely unchanged by the reveal, one truth settled over the cabin. Real class doesn't shout. It doesn't brag. And it certainly doesn't need to insult others to feel important. Sometimes, the quietest person in the room carries the loudest legacy. And sometimes, recognition comes far too late. The captain continued, his voice calm but filled with respect. "We are honored to have Keanu Reeves, one of the most respected actors in the world, flying with us today. Thank you for choosing our airline, sir." For a split second, the cabin was frozen in silence. Then applause erupted. It wasn't forced. It wasn't loud at first. It grew naturally, seat by seat, person by person. Some passengers smiled and clapped warmly. Others stood up slightly in their seats, craning their necks for a better look. A few people cheered softly, unable to hide their excitement. Camera flashes blinked discreetly as phones captured the moment. The quiet man, Keanu, rose slowly from his seat. There was no dramatic gesture. No confident pose. Just a modest stand, a gentle wave, and a small, grateful smile. He nodded respectfully toward the cabin, clearly uncomfortable with the attention but appreciative of the kindness. Within seconds, he sat back down, as humble as he had been from the beginning. The applause slowly faded. And that's when reality hit the rude man. His face turned pale. The confident smirk that once rested on his lips vanished completely. His mouth opened slightly, as if searching for words, but none came. His eyes stared forward, unfocused, his mind racing to catch up with the truth. The same man he had mocked. The same man he had insulted. The same man he said didn't belong. Was admired by millions across the world. Not because of wealth. Not because of status. But because of humility. The rude man sank deeper into his seat, shrinking into himself. He avoided eye contact with everyone around him, the passengers who had heard his insults, the ones who now looked at him with quiet judgment. A flight attendant stepped closer and leaned down gently toward him. "Sir," she whispered firmly, "please remember that respect doesn't come with a ticket class." Her words were calm, but they cut deep. The man swallowed hard, nodding slightly, unable to respond. Then something unexpected happened. Keanu turned toward him. No anger. No pride. No revenge. Just calm understanding. He looked at the man, smiled gently, and spoke in a quiet, steady voice. "It's okay," he said. "We all have bad days." The cabin went silent again. That single sentence carried more weight than any insult ever could. There was no lecture. No embarrassment. No attempt to prove superiority. Just kindness. The rude man's eyes dropped. His shoulders slumped. In that moment, he looked smaller than he ever had before, not because he was exposed, but because he was humbled. Around them, passengers exchanged glances. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others smiled softly, moved not by fame, but by grace. The plane began preparing for takeoff. As engines hummed and lights dimmed, the lesson lingered in the air. True class doesn't announce itself. True power doesn't demand respect. And true greatness doesn't need to put others down. That flight carried more than passengers that day. It carried a reminder. You never know who someone is. And how you treat people, especially when you think no one is watching, says everything about who you are. And sometimes, the most powerful response to cruelty is kindness. The rest of the flight passed in calm silence, as if the tension that once filled the cabin had completely dissolved. The atmosphere felt lighter now, peaceful, respectful, almost reflective. Keanu Reeves spoke kindly with the flight attendants, thanking them sincerely for even the smallest things. He joked softly with a passenger nearby, making them laugh without drawing attention to himself. When the same child who had waved at him earlier leaned over again, he smiled warmly and spoke to them with genuine interest, as if they were the most important person on the plane. There was no arrogance. No celebrity attitude. No sense of superiority. Just quiet respect. The rude man, on the other hand, stayed completely silent. He didn't speak again. He didn't complain. He didn't even look up. The confident posture he once carried was gone. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes fixed downward, as though he were replaying every word he had spoken earlier. The luxury around him no longer felt impressive. The seat no longer felt powerful. Time passed slowly. When the plane finally began its descent, passengers straightened in their seats. Some glanced once more toward Keanu, still amazed, not by who he was, but by how he behaved. As the aircraft landed and taxied to the gate, people stood and collected their belongings. Instead of rushing to leave, many passengers paused. Some thanked Keanu quietly. Others expressed admiration, not for his fame, but for his kindness. He responded to each person the same way, with a gentle smile and a respectful nod, never acting superior, never seeking attention. Then came the final moment. As the rude man walked past him, head lowered, avoiding everyone's gaze, he hesitated for a split second. He looked as if he wanted to speak, to apologize, to say something, anything. But no words came. Before the moment passed, Keanu looked up and spoke softly. "Take care." Just two simple words. No judgment. No reminder. No bitterness. That moment stayed with everyone who witnessed it, because it wasn't about fame. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about first class or economy. It was about character. The lesson was impossible to ignore. You never know who someone truly is. Status doesn't define worth. Money doesn't define character. And humility will always speak louder than arrogance. That flight ended, but the memory of it didn't. People carried it with them, not as a celebrity encounter, but as a reminder of how easily we judge others by appearances. How quickly we assume value based on clothing, confidence, or seat numbers. And how wrong we can be. So the next time you feel tempted to look down on someone. The next time you judge before understanding. The next time you think status makes someone important. remember this story. Because the quietest person in the room might just be the greatest one there. And true greatness doesn't announce itself. It shows itself. In kindness. In humility. And in how we treat others when we think it doesn't matter. If this story touched your heart and reminded you that humility is the greatest class of all, don't forget to like this video. Subscribe to the channel for more powerful, real-life inspired stories. And share it with someone who needs this reminder today. Because the world needs more kindness and fewer judgments.